Hello, everyone. I'm Beverley Hatcher-Mbu. I'm a Deputy Director of Programs at Development Gateway and IREX Venture, and this is submission 0860, Future-Proofing Data Governance to Prepare for Climate Change. And I'm with my co-author, Tom. Tom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Orrell. I'm also a Deputy Director of Programs, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, whatever day that may be that you're watching this video. Before we begin, I would just also like to acknowledge the support that we had in producing this from Jacob Leiken, who is a JD candidate for the class of 2025 at the New York University School of Law. So back to you, Beth.
Great. So as is customary with the Data for Policy conference, each presenter and paper writer produces a video. Tom and I are a part of a nonprofit. We are practitioners. We did not write a paper, so we thought the best way to share some of our preliminary thoughts before we get to the conference is to have this as a conversation. But before we do that, a little bit about Development Gateway. So we're a nonprofit. We grew out of a World Bank project approximately 25 years ago, looking at how can we put the right data in the right hands at the right time. Through that work across sectors, we've both developed technology, we have software engineers in-house, and we've advised around data governance, data use, data sharing. We think a lot about what do we need to do with technology that looks at both the humans, the processes, as well as the data and the technology. All of these things are closely combined. So we give this to you as a preface so that you understand where we're coming from when we talk through some of our findings based on a mixture of our work and desk research. This is a good place to talk a bit about the problem that we see. So Tom, what problem are we seeing that has brought us to talk about data governance in the context of climate change?
Thanks, Bev. So as you mentioned at DG, we've done a lot of work in terms of exploring the different types of data needs and digital solutions that can be applied in development settings across different sectors. So health, agriculture, education, anti-corruption work, etc. Climate change in many respects is no different from the work that we've done in the past. The types of issue that we face are quite similar in terms of the need to establish coherent and joined up policies across institutions at the national level, coherent and implementable understanding of what climate change interventions look like at the international level. So having standardized definitions and classifications of what climate finance activities look like, for example, and the need to ensure that there's interoperability and integration of different data sources to produce rich insights across the board. The difference with climate change is the scale of the challenge and the vastness of the scope. Climate change, is dealt with both as a standalone sector and area, but at the same time, in reality, at the implementation level, it's something that touches upon outcome areas across every other sector. Climate change and agriculture are very closely connected. Climate change and health are very closely connected. Climate change and educational needs are going to be very closely connected moving forward. So that diffuse nature of climate change as an area creates unique policy problems, and it creates unique data problems and challenges, in particular when it comes to defining things, classifying things, etc. The way that data systems operate is by having very clear definitions and precise interpretations of certain words and certain concepts so that machines can automatically retrieve them, pull them together, aggregate them, etc. And the way that we define all of these things will also impact the way in which future generations of artificial intelligence tools will be able to support us in our analysis and our aggregation and interpretation of data and information about climate change. So those are some of the top level issues that are raised by this sector. I think just drilling down a little bit more specifically into this question, given the overarching policy challenge, there are a couple of areas in particular that we're interested in as DG, and we're very interested in other people's thoughts in at the conference. And that is looking at what the data needs are likely to be for climate change down the line, and how we can start now to future-proof data governance processes and structures to ensure that there is that institutional and human level collaboration and communication moving forward to help streamline the data systems and the data processes. Finally, what I would say is when it comes to the trustworthy governance and use of AI, that's an integral part of this question too. At DG, we're very firmly of the belief that AI and machine learning tools are exactly that. They are tools. They are a next generation. What we're seeing now is a next generation of generative AI tools coming into the marketplace that offer a lot of opportunity. But we mustn't lose track of the fact that AI is much broader than just generative AI, and that we can apply AI tools now to help us do things like clean and structure climate data sets, analyze and interpret and extract trends from Earth observations data, for example, about how the world is changing, and to help us to analyze and aggregate information and pull it together. I was at a conference a few years ago where the Minister of AI for the United Arab Emirates pointed out that just for one day at the moment on Earth, there's around 100 petabytes of data created of Earth observations data. And it would take one scientist about 100 years to analyze that day's worth of climate and meteorological data. So AI is a really, really integral tool to ensuring that we're able to analyze and utilize the insights from data that we have about climate change on a day-to-day basis. So that's one side of the equation, ensuring that we are able to utilize data AI to help us analyze and structure data. The other side of the equation, and this is perhaps where trustworthiness comes in even more, is ensuring that we have high quality and well-structured data in order to train the next generation of AI and ML tools. And that is equally as important as that first categorization. And in fact, it's almost a virtuous circle of being able to utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning tools to analyze data, and ensuring then that you have high quality data inputs that you can use to train the next generation of tools and models, and ensure that consistency and quality of both input and output. So that's the contour of the problem that we're looking at. It's a very big contour. It's a very big problem. It goes all the way from classifying and talking about what we mean by AI, by climate change, adaptation and mitigation, what types of things which are happening to the planet fall into those categorizations, and then thinking also about what types of data do we need, what kinds of proxy indicators can we pull from all the different types of data that we already collect, and then all the way through to thinking about how we actually categorize and think about our own interventions in relation to climate change, and how we track where funding is going, how effective it's being, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to hand that problem back to you now, Bev, that big one, and you can talk to us perhaps a little bit about the methodology that we've been employing to try and understand this problem a little bit better.
That's perfect. Thanks, Tom. I think you framed that really well. So just a quick note on the methodology. How did we get here? Because we'll share in a moment a couple of the findings that we've had. So we used a combination of both looking at the real-time levels the real-time evidence we were gaining from the ground up from our projects. We've been working with the Great Green Wall Accelerator multi-purpose platform, which is a collaboration between UNCCD and the Pan-African Agency for the Great Green Wall, as well as 11 Great Green Wall nations. So we've looked very carefully in working with them at how they aggregate their data and what that process has looked at, where some of the challenges and opportunities have been. We've also been working closely with Ethiopia's Ministry of Agriculture under what we've called the ALIVE program, which is also about taking a whole of ministry, whole of government approach to data governance to support new and existing digital livestock data platforms. So we're very much anchored in practical work that we're doing in real time and how we can bring those lessons and share them to a broader audience. In addition, we also did a little bit of desk research, looking at development projects related to climate change in Africa, since that most closely aligns with where some of our work is taking place, or a lot of our work is taking place. Looking at a number of organizations in carbon markets, agricultural tools, and more. And we were particularly interested to understand the data transparency of each project. We created a catalog for this research, which is accessible online, which we can share in the notes. So this led us to a couple of key findings. None of these are ultimately conclusive. These are still emerging learnings, but quite central ones that we think are worth sharing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bev. Just to build on that, one of the objectives that we have at this conference is to get other experts and organizations' feedback on what we think are some of the key findings that we have. So we look forward to hearing from you, and please do reach out to us if you're watching this virtually at the conference or after the fact, because we'd love to hear from you. The first major finding that we have is that in order to address the scope of the challenge around climate change, we need to have coordination and governance mechanisms that transcend specific institutions. Often what currently happens is that you have particular ministries or other bodies across government around the world that are tasked with handling the climate change agenda, as it were. In some economies and in some countries, you may have an overarching executive level strategy or plan, and that may bring in different stakeholders, etc. But I think what we really need to see is a far more granular level of technical cooperation between different parts of government in order to ensure that they are well prepared to handle, process, and extract value from data that is relevant to their portfolios about climate change. So what I mean in practice by that is to think about how we can work towards a reality where you have information about individuals' health, crop health, and climate change. Well, when I say climate change, broader climate change trends in terms of temperature changes, pollution levels, water quality, soil quality, all of these various indicators being brought together in ways that will allow for new types of insight to be gleaned and a better understanding of how people and food production systems, for example, are responding to the reality of a changing climate on the ground, and the effect that adaptation and mitigation efforts are having. Without this kind of information and this type of integration of quite granular information, it's going to be extremely difficult, for example, to measure what the impact of a particular investment in a climate change adaptation or mitigation strategy might be. So I think by and large, it's safe to say that for many governments, they have many of the right indicators in place, and they have potentially the data streams to support those indicators in place. But what we're not seeing is an integration and a focus on innovative and data science-driven approaches to interpreting the data that they have in order to extract maximal value. And I think we really need to move in that direction, and that starts by promoting cross-institutional coordination and joint governance of data assets at a whole of society level.
Great, thanks, Tom. And I think that's a perfect segue, because our closely found sort of second finding is around technical support partners like us as DG, who happen to be a nonprofit, even with the private sector, should really be thinking about supporting governments to take whole of ministry approaches when talking about developing, scaling, and connecting various digital agriculture tools. This comes from the idea that agriculture isn't just livestock. It isn't just, the cashews value chain. It's lovely when you build in this little box related to one particular value chain, but farmers often have multiple. They have cows on their farms. They have cashew plants on their cashew crops on their farms. They have wheat as well. When they go for support to government services to other partners are not asking for just one crop, they're asking for all of them. So how, when we think about supporting governments and really delivering full service delivery, their digital platforms and their data need to be able to make that connection as well. So, for example, one of the things that we've seen is having ministry-wide and national strategies that really do need to lay the foundation for the growth of data lakes, for example, which will be a critical data source powering effective AI and will allow for this level of connection between different types of crops in places that really ultimately serve farmers, as a very specific example. DG has had the opportunity to work with Tanzania on their first digital agriculture strategy. So while our example is Africa, Tanzania specific, Africa specific, it is very generalizable. The need for centralized whole of ministry strategies that look at digital and data as across the value chains is going to be critical if we're going to be able to bring the data together for climate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. And that's going to require a couple of other things, I would say. I think we need to ensure, on the one hand, that the regulatory regimes and the kind of overarching structures are there and in place to accommodate the types of shift in approach that we need to see. And I think it's also going to require us to use multi-stakeholder initiatives in ways which really bring people together and maximize the value of that data ecosystem. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that first, and then I'll come in on the legislative and regulatory side.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, Tom. One thing that we also see, I think, in part because of our structure having software engineers in-house, that often the developers and the software teams at governments, at other organizations often get left out of the capacity building or growth conversation. So there really needs to be a carve-out that says that developers must use existing systems instead of building new ones from scratch. But in order to do that, we're gonna need a complex set of strengths and capacity to be able to do that. We know very well, everybody talks a good game about not reinventing the wheel, but how do we actually avoid that in practice? There are many sector-specific working groups, data steward structures, data collaboratives, and so on, in which data governance decision-making is decided upon collectively across multiple institutions and needs. We have examples, I've talked a lot about agriculture, so I'll stick with that theme. We've seen examples in the fertilizer working space across, really across Africa. But the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development has done a lot of really fantastic research on this as well, with their data, with their effective and ethical data sharing at scale cookbook, which basically is a really dynamic compendium that brings both American, European, Latin American, African, Asian examples of what cross-sector approaches look like in practice. It's basically acknowledging, I think sometimes there's a rush to create new structures, new climate working groups, new things that are specific to whatever the challenges at hand. But we need to think very carefully. People are feeling constrained by financial and time-based resources. How can we leverage and scale existing working groups that are already often tackling some of the same kinds of data that feed into climate mitigation and adaptation, and repurpose those and expand those a little bit to be able to scale. So this comes back to the larger legal framework, I think, that you started to talk about, Tom, that can sometimes shape or make these kinds of collaboratives possible.
Absolutely. If we go back to that fundamental question that we're looking at here, which is how do we future-proof data governance, including, well, when we talk about data governance, I would also include here the rules that frame how we utilize AI and the tools to process information, how we govern those, how we future-proof those areas essentially, to help combat climate change also really depends on legal and regulatory frameworks that exist in different countries. In recent years, there's been a real expansion in the adoption of GDPR-esque type legislation by countries around the world. And while on the one hand, that's great, I'm a human rights lawyer by profession, so I'm always very happy to see human-centric approaches like that. I think that there is a risk that we're focusing perhaps a little bit too much on data protection within policy space and within international policy discussions, at least ones that Bev and I are a part of, at the expense of thinking about many of the other types of regulation and rule which are needed to encourage data integration in a safe and effective way. And sticking with the European example, not because I think the whole world needs to follow in Europe's footsteps, but simply because they have a very mature legal regime in this regard. GDPR is just one very small piece of the overarching European data governance legislative regime, if I can call it that, regulatory regime. The GDPR itself has an underappreciated sister, which is the free flow of data regulation, and that is designed to try and break vendor lock-in and digital and data sovereignty within Europe. And then it's complemented by a whole host of other acts and regulatory guidance within the EU. You have the Data Governance Act and you have the Data Act within the EU, both of which are targeted at trying to stimulate the integration and interoperability of data in ways which are safe, which do protect personal data, but which also improve the ability of people to access information and for institutions and others to be able to integrate information in ways that will allow them to utilize and extract the value of that data better. You also have the AI Act, of course, which again is a risk-based approach, but as always, and taken within the context of the European regulatory environment, it's targeted at trying to minimize the risks that AI pose to individuals and to societies, but while also ensuring that they can be applied safely and effectively to maximal effect in areas where they have the greatest value. So I think if we're talking about trustworthy governance of AI, we need to be taking that broader approach that places like Europe are taking. That's not to say that we copy paste what Europe is doing everywhere in the world, but it is to say that you cannot just look at data protection or AI or any other kind of issue in a singular way from a regulatory perspective, but you need to be looking at the broader data and digital regulatory landscape and what needs to happen to ensure that you have consistency and harmonization across the ways in which you establish those overarching frameworks. Because it's only once you have those overarching frameworks in place that you can then safely operate as a data ecosystem in terms of a multiplicity of stakeholders. And it's only once you have all of those safeguards and that overarching framework in place that you can really start to talk about how you apply standards and how you ensure that data are interoperable, because you have the safeguards in place and you have a common understanding across stakeholders about what can and can't be done.
Absolutely. So to recap, we really said 4 things in the last couple of minutes. If you've made it this far in the video, this is excellent. So we've said 4 things. We've said governments should move away from individual data sharing when possible towards institution-wide or cross-institutional data sharing. We've said that technical partners like Development Gateway and others should support governments to take whole of ministry approaches when thinking about developing and scaling digital agricultural tools. We've also said that we've got a lot of pre-existing sector-specific working groups, collaboratives. How can we better utilize those instead of creating new working groups on top of them? And lastly, we've said that the legal framework really matters, and thinking not just about data protection policies, but also data governance acts, data acts, AI acts that all come together in a larger legal ecosystem, using the EU as an example, but not the only of what this can look like in future. So Tom, to end us, why does all of this matter ultimately? Why do you care not just at Data for Policy, but beyond?
Climate change is here, it's real. Our lives are being impacted every day by what's happening. We're starting to see shifts in investment that are needed to more effectively combat this. But as somebody in the World Bank who I spoke to fairly recently told me, even if we had, say, $5 or $6 trillion on tap right now to target climate change, we wouldn't know how best to spend that money because we don't have the pipelines in place, and we also don't know what the interventions that have the greatest impact and return on investment are. And in order to be able to really scale up our interventions and to be able to really understand what impact this phenomenon is going to be having on our lives and on the world in the years ahead, where it's going to get more and more extreme, we really need to work on ensuring that we're able to leverage the information and the data that we do have to the maximum effect. I do not think that there is a shortage of data, but what we do have a shortage of at the moment is that interconnectedness and ability to analyze and extract value from data in a way that really maximizes the potential of that information.
That's a perfect point to end on. Thanks so much, Tom. We're looking forward to meeting people in person and to continuing the conversation before and after. So thanks, Tom, and thanks, Data for Policy community.
Thank you. Thank you, Bev.